I'm Mike Hannewald, field agronomist with Beck's Hybrids, and wanted to cover some information on late season scouting. As we get into mid-September, this is a time when we don't normally think about scouting our fields because there's nothing we're going to really go do at this point other than harvest. That's our next step across the field. But while we're not necessarily going out to see if we need to make an application with the sprayer or if we need to consider another treatment, that we would normally associate with scouting. In this case, we're just out here to learn, to try and set ourselves up for a successful year next year. And so we'll start off covering some things to look for in your soybean field. So we're standing in front of a bean field here. This is a sandy loam field that has some sand ridges and some sand pockets in it. And you can see those showing up. The yellow area right behind me is a little pocket of sand. And so those beans simply ran out of water because of the dry conditions that we've had in this area this year. And so with that sand having less water holding capacity, beans ran out of water and are simply prematurely dying, which obviously is not something that we want to see. However, I get a lot of questions sometimes about how do you know whether or not something is a disease, or is it premature death, or is it just normal maturity? And so I pulled a soybean plant here that is showing some patterns of yellowing on the leaves. And so as we look at the leaf here, you can see that we're seeing some yellowing in between the veins, not really a clear pattern to it, but that might be suspected as potentially sudden death. That might be our first thought if we're seeing something like this. However, one of the best things you can do to diagnose whether or not you're looking at a disease is to split the stem open down at the lower part of the plant down to at the soil line. And you can see here we've got a clear green center that turns white, and then clear white on both sides in this situation. So this is a healthy plant that simply is running out of moisture or just approaching maturity. As you can see, all the beans are starting to get just a yellow hint to them in this field. Now there are some diseases I've been seeing this year and wanted to highlight some of those and how to identify them in case if you're seeing them in your field. So the first one is sudden death syndrome. That's the one that we most commonly think of when we think of a late season disease in soybeans. And you can see that picture on your screen. But the key thing with sudden death is that the foliar symptoms on the leaves look just like brown stem rot. The way to tell the difference is to look at the stem itself. And so you can see when you have sudden death syndrome, you get brown discoloration in the cortex of the leaves on either side of the center of the stem. Whereas with brown stem rot, the stem turns brown down the center of the stem, or the pith of the stem. That's how to distinguish those two. I have seen some sudden death this year, not widespread or a major problem, but it is out there. Another foliar disease that has been noticed is soybean vein necrotic virus. This is one that is not very common and is showing up in some pockets across northern Ohio and northeast Indiana this year. And this one has foliar symptoms that just show up as kind of random splotches across the leaves, as you can see it. Those spots don't follow the veins like sudden death does. And so that's a viral infection that is caused by thrips. They're a tiny little insect, most likely blew in on the hurricane earlier this year, infected those soybeans, and now we're seeing the results of that disease. Fortunately, that disease isn't severely yield limiting, and so we wouldn't expect major issues from that disease, but another observation that you might notice. Last thing I want to comment on in soybeans is nematodes. Now I know there's nothing you can see with nematodes. If they're real bad, you might see some egg masses on the roots, but that's even pretty rare to find them because they're microscopic little organisms. And so, but with nematodes, if you see areas in your field that the beans look stressed, especially in a dry year like what we've been having this year, and you don't really have a good explanation for those, or it's that spot, those beans look more stressed than another spot with a similar soil type that's experiencing similar drought stress, nematodes might be the issue. Now, there's no way to know for sure at this point out in the field, but by walking your fields now, you can see and identify those spots that don't look quite right and don't have another good explanation for it. If that's the case, this fall after harvest would be the best time to pull some soil samples and send in for analysis of nematodes for egg counts to see, do you have an issue or not. All this information you're collecting, make sure you jot it down and record it somewhere helpful that you'll be able to reference it again later, because that's going to be helpful in making decisions for next year. If we understand what our disease pressures we're seeing now, we can better plan for what we're going to deal with next year, especially when we're in the type of situation that we are with the grain markets and the economics of farming being where it's at, I expect that we're probably going to see a few more acres than what we would normally see of beans back to beans. And we want to make sure that when we're going back to soybeans, we've got a variety that has strength against the disease pressures that we're seeing this year that are going to be the most prevalent ones that we might have to deal with next year. All right, switching gears to corn. Here we are standing in a cornfield. Again, this is some sandy soil, and I intentionally picked one of the sand ridges here. This corn's been pretty severely drought stressed, as you can see by the looks of it. We still have some decent ears here. I'm actually pleasantly surprised to see the ears for this soil type in the weather that we've had this year. But wanted to highlight some of the things I'm seeing in this more drought stressed corn. So one of the first things I like looking at in a pre-harvest scouting, like what we're doing right now, is stalk strength, because that's one of our biggest concerns going into fall. Is this corn going to be able to stand up over the next few months as we approach harvest? So best way to do that is actually dig up a plant and then take your knife and split that stalk lengthwise. And you're seeing here on this drought stress corn, we're seeing some crown rot that's showing up. This showed up pretty late here, so we're seeing some of that show up. And then we're seeing a little bit of some, what I'm guessing to be anthracnose stalk rot showing up here at that node where that broke. And so in this drought stressed corn, standability might be a little bit of a concern here in this particular spot in this field. And so that's going to be something we're going to watch out for. Now, this corn has been drought stressed for quite some time. You can see a picture on your screen that I took quite a while, about a month ago, and you can see what this particular area of the field looked like at that time. But when we're in variable soils, we know that things can change very quickly. And so this next picture that you're seeing there now was just a few hundred feet away from where I took that first picture. And you can see a month ago again what that corn looked like back in early August. So over here, just a few hundred feet away from where I was just a minute ago, you can see the soil type changed, and we're under a lot less severe drought stress here, and the corn looks a lot healthier. And in turn, then we're also seeing stalks that are much healthier. So you look here and you see again healthy crowns. That black is just some dirt there, and then a healthy firm stalk all the way up here that we're seeing here in this part of the field. So standability should not be a concern in a majority of the field. It's just going to be those areas that were severely drought stressed. Now, a couple other things I'm noticing as I'm out here and wanted to point out is I get this question a lot about this black discoloration of the stalk, and what could that be? And there's a couple different things. So to know for sure, you need to peel this off, and so you see it's actually underneath the leaf sheath. That's not the stalk turning black, it's the leaf sheath. And if we peel this back, we're finding that black color in there, and we keep going until we get this all unrolled. And so you see that we've got that black color there that looks pretty ugly. But when we look at the actual stalk itself, it's pretty clean. We've got a few black spots, but nothing major to be concerned about. So what that is a majority of that black discoloration is pollen. So it's pollen that has rotted. So when pollen falls from our tassel, it lands on the leaves, and then we get a rain, and that washes that pollen down to the collar here, and then that pollen collects in there, water collects in there. Every time we get a dew, it collects in there, and then that pollen rots. And so that's that black discoloration that we're seeing. Now, if some of these black spots that we're seeing could be some very minor anthracnose stalk rot, but when a majority of that black just peels away and wipes right off with that leaf, it's just rotten pollen. If we saw that black really penetrating this stalk and really covering a lot of the actual stalk, then we might be cause for concern for anthracnose stalk rot and potentially standability concerns. Another thing I wanted to highlight that I've seen quite a bit of this year that's a little bit of an abnormality are aphids up here. So there you can see all those white things are aphid skeletons or aphid carcasses there. They're all dead at this point. But we did have quite a few aphids move in shortly after pollination. Again, our theory is that they blew in on the hurricane and came in here. But as long as our tassel emerged correctly and the corn pollinated well, they really aren't a big concern for overall yield loss in this situation. And you can see here on a lot of these ears, it pollinated very well right up to the tip. And so the aphids didn't hurt us this year in this situation, even though that was a little unusual to see that many aphids in corn. Switching gears a little bit, I want to talk about nutrient deficiencies. So as we are looking at this, and you have to be careful you don't wait too long to get out in your cornfields to look at this, but here we're seeing some nitrogen deficiency. So nitrogen deficiency starts up the center of the leaf and works up from the tip of the leaf, but stays in the center. And so we're seeing some of that. Now, we are getting very close to the time when the corn starts remobilizing nutrients, and it's going to, whether it has enough nitrogen or not, it's going to move the nutrients that have been stored in the leaves and in the stalk and move those up to fill the ear at this point. Anyway, so we're not going to worry too much about this, but this tells me that at some point this crop was a little bit short on N. I'm going to attribute this mainly to drought stress because nitrogen requires water for it to be able to move through the soil and get to the roots. And so probably not going to make any major changes on this. However, if you're seeing it, it might not be a bad idea to evaluate your nitrogen program and just make sure you're supplying plenty for your corn. If we were seeing this yellow near the edges of the leaves as opposed to the center, that would be potassium deficiency. We've also seen a decent amount of that, but again, potassium is highly dependent on water, and so you may have plenty of potassium out there. It just, at one point in time during this season, was not accessible to that corn crop. Another thing we want to be evaluating at this point is leaf disease. And so you can see I found some tar spot here. Now, I was scouting this field back around the milk and the dough stage, and there was no tar spot present at that time. And so the tar spot that has showed up since then is coming in late enough that I really have no concerns for this causing any yield loss. Even if this corn would be totally covered in black spots like this by the time the combine rolls through here, it's not a concern because the corn was able to progress through its maturity and die naturally faster than what the tar spot would be able to kill it. Had we had tar spot come in earlier than what it did prior to that dough stage and infect, and had we had some more rains, we could have seen some premature death. And I was in some plots just last week where down in southern Ohio where we saw that, where that tar spot moved in and actually affected the later maturity corn more so than the earlier maturity corn. So the shorter season corn was far enough through its growth stages when that tar spot moved in that it stayed fairly green and healthy and was able to die a natural death as far and reach black layer correctly. However, some of that fuller season corn was not as far along when the tar spot infected, and as we would expect, the tar spot was able to kill some of that corn prematurely. And so we might see some premature death in our fuller season corn this year if that tar spot had infected. And so that's an important thing to note. I've also, not seeing it in this field, but I've also seen plenty of gray leaf spot and northern corn leaf blight out there. And you can see what those look like on the screen. Gray leaf spot are smaller rectangular lesions that stay within the veins of the corn, and they are brown in color despite the name. Whereas then northern corn leaf blight, that one tends to be more gray, but you tend to see larger, longer lesions that are wider than the leaf vein, and that shows up there as well. And so some other observations to just take notes of what you're seeing and what you are experiencing out in your field. As we move towards harvest, hopefully spending a little bit of time in your fields this time of year can help you be able to understand some of the why behind what that number on the yield monitor might mean and why you're seeing that number, whether it's higher or lower than what you expected. And it also gives scouting fields this time of year gives you great perspective of what you need to prepare for in future years, whether it's next year going back to the same crop or the following year when you rotate back to corn or soybeans as part of your rotation. Either way, the information you collect now and gather can be very helpful. If you have any questions about anything you're seeing out in your field or any other agronomic topic, feel free to reach out to myself or your local Beck's representative, and we'd be happy to help. We wish you a safe and bountiful harvest.